Hi, welcome to the Heart Powered Ventures podcast on the future of heart powered entrepreneurship. I'm laughing because we've just had so much fun before we got on, and I'm sure we'll have more fun as we go. And I realize we have three time zones covered here today. We got what are you're Central or Mountain? You're Central, right?
I'm Central.
Yeah, and he's out west. All right,
I'm
very good.
I'm I'm Pacific.
Pacific. I mean, yes, yeah, you're still out in Arizona. And I'm here today with my producer and whatever the heck he is. And can you pronounce your name the way it's supposed to sound? Because I realized I thought I was doing it well, and I blew it completely.
Yeah, I'll do it the original way. It's Artyom Smirnov.
Okay. And how do we Americanize that?
Americans, it's Artem Smirnov.
Okay.
It's a tame, yeah, it's a it's a tame impersonation.
Loses something in the translation. And Artem has been on his world tour, Colorado, Arizona. Were you in Utah?
I drove through Utah. I was long enough there to, jump into a hot spring and break my phone, and then I drove south.
Okay. Once you accomplish that, cross that off your bucket list. Ruined phone, hot spring, Utah. We got that one covered. And Arizona, California, back to Arizona, down to Mexico, back to Arizona. And Artem and I are working on some really terrific stuff, which we'll talk about more, not today. But it's just been, I got to tell you, it's just been so much fun and such a joy to watch you, flower, and then to be there to kind of co-create with your flowering also. So
Thanks, buddy. And I've been feeling the residual effects of the magic of Dave Gold. So I'm happy to be in your life. I'm happy to be mine.
That's great. And then I'm also with Sharon. What do you, is it Sharon, just Sharon Bennett, strictly Sharon Bennett all the time, or what is it?
Sharon Bennett, but sometimes it is Sharon Lee White Bennett,
Okay.
on certificates just for the heck of it. So,
and Sharon and I were going back almost 30 years, very close. So, and obviously she's not that old. So I met her when she was just a pup.
That's right.
And it's just so great that we've just come back into each other's lives recently, I don't know, a year ago or so. And then she's been just one of our integral parts of our Commonwealth group. And I will just give her your title. Well, what you tell us your vocational title.
Sure. My vocational title is a spiritual director. One of the newer words is spiritual companion for those wayward souls. No, ignore that part.
Well, we're all wayward. I mean,
yes.
So yes, so Sharon and I. Well, we should just tell a little bit of history about where we go, because it's just unbelievable that you've probably known me, at least anyway. When I think about how old you are, it's like 2/3 of your life, in one form or another, and part of this. So give us a history of and I guess when you gave you kind of your spiritual history, or your philosophic leanings, or whatever, your trajectory. It's probably a good place to start is where we first came into.
Sure. So yeah, good old North Carolina, NC State. There's this group called the Self-Knowledge Symposium. They were giving this talk.
What year was this?
This would have been 1990.
Wow.
So, I think, or 91. I'm trying to remember which semester. I think it was pretty much my freshman year. So yeah, fall of 90, and got there, really intense lecture, recognized someone I'd seen at the School of Science and Math. So just felt like I connected immediately. And it was funny. I'll share this because I was actually hanging out with a friend of mine. He was actually an ex-boyfriend, so we were still kind of in that weird space. And it was movie night at the student union, and they were playing Pretty Woman. But at the same time was this lecture, which goes to show you what SKS was doing. And I was, we were going to go, we were literally debating where to go as we walked. And he said, I don't want to go to this. I don't feel like thinking tonight. And so he split off, and I went to, and needless to say, it did change my life. So still haven't watched Pretty Woman, by the way. Anyhow, pretty involved with that. And again, what I tell people, it's interesting to share about that group now to others when I tell about my spiritual journey. You know, we weren't Christian based necessarily. And I'll just say that, you know, one of our teachers was this West Virginia redneck, you know, Zen Master type, but that had a legitimate, wonderful experience and wanted to teach people about it. We fasted, we were celibate. This was in college. We went on retreats. We did Buddhism. We went to, you know, we went to a Christian monastery to do retreats. We meditated, we read, we discussed, you know, you name it, we were doing it. It was all about experience, not just learn. It was learning from leaders and others, but also going out and doing it your own experience. So, you know, life changed for me. I ended up getting a divorce, did some wonderful overseas travel, which was a big healing step. Now, before I left the country, I met my now husband. So that was a kind of a big game changer. I ended up going back after my travels and didn't really do much spiritual stuff. I mean, it was always kind of the background. You know, I was always out in nature but nothing real formal church. I mean, I was sort of raised in the Methodist church, but weren't real, you know, regular attendees. And, you know, I just kind of had to live life, got married, had kids, was living in a very small conservative town in Oklahoma. And, but after things, I always describe this as, and I think most moms and even dads can recognize this, that, you know, there's a point where your kids are old enough and the dust settles and you feel like you can take a breath. And that breath was huge for me. In fact, I had this quite interesting experience. I was laying in bed contemplating whatever, and I literally felt like the lens of my heart. You know how you change lenses on an old, you know.
Yeah, I call it turning the jewel. And
yeah,
see
right. I mean, my focus changed, and I felt it in my chest. And I was like, wow. So ended up again through a really neat set of circumstances, learned about a spiritual direction training program in Oklahoma. At one point when I really started feeling stirrings, it was going to be too much to try to go do that and still be a mom and work. But then I literally, and you know, I'm Christian based. So literally I do say that God led me to still waters because I live in Stillwater now. Moving to Stillwater, game changer for being able to attend spiritual direction school or training. I started working part-time at a college ministry where we focused on contemplative practices, but also helping women find their vocation in life, which that's all about what we talk about in Heart Powered. Not, you know, not your job, not your career, but what is your mission, your purpose, your passions in life. And the blessings have just been flowing from that. It's been amazing. I mean, in the meantime, I lost both parents the year after we moved here to Stillwater, which was pretty tough. Given I was an only child, they were still in North Carolina. And I'll be honest, not the best relationship with them. You know, there's some issues there. But working with my own spiritual director and others, working through that and just being on this journey of self-discovery. You know, been a director now for, well, almost 2 years, but during COVID times and navigating that. So that's it in a nutshell. I know there's a lot.
So I want to go off script as if we ever have a script, but and just say that I realize how limiting it is to hang on to our old ideas about who people are because we're set in a certain way, and how liberating it is to be free of that. Because you know, I knew you when you were a pup, you know, and so even in all the relationships we have, I don't think I've never heard your full story. And when I hear your full story and I hear your stature, I realize, wow, as much as I love and respect and admire, and you know, and obviously I'm voting with our time because I'm bringing you into this podcast to tell your story, I still had these old ideas of who you were. They're just vestiges, and there's no crime to this. There's no like, oh my God, I'm not going to go to my spiritual director if I had one and confess.
Right.
But just how when you're living life openly and kind of expectantly of good things happening and not being tied to old ideas, that people can really emerge in their fullness. So I'm just recognizing that, but I'm also just acknowledging and kind of highlighting to everyone how beautiful it is to just, really live anew each day, including in how we see and relate to each other. So anyway, thank you for doing that. And thank you for this incredible journey that you went on, because when I met you, we all have our personas, our way of getting through, getting by. And you were just kind of this happy Southern girl, kind of bouncy and light and experimental, just let's try this, let's try that. And, and you still have your vivaciousness, but it's not because that's not your protection against the world. It just happens to be who you are.
Right. Yeah. I would, I claim that. That's how I experience the world, even though can be a lot of fear. I mean, COVID scared the out of me, I just kind of froze. And so it's not like I've got it all figured out, but, again, reaching out to trying different, prayer methods or, different things, or just kind of just being, just letting things unfold.
So it's interesting because this month in Heart Powered Adventures, it's all kind of like we're reclaiming our inner empath or our inner spirituality or what all that is. And so you have a lot of people that have a spiritual or a higher calling, and they've kind of, they've managed to fit it into their persona of being a financial planner or being, a business person or this. But you're overtly, you're like the only person in the Commonwealth that I can think of offhand who's just overtly, hey, baby, I'm a spiritual director.
Right.
So what does it feel like to have a calling?
Oh gosh, it's amazing. And again, I wouldn't say, I've worn a lot of hats. I was an animal science major. I worked on dairies.
Remember that.
In chamber direction. I worked in a tax office. Then I got a little bit closer to what I'm doing with, with the ministry, college ministry work, but it's so fulfilling. Even though there's some days I'm like, what the hell am I doing? Should I do this? And now I want to say I'm coming from a place where I don't have to have a job and things like that. My husband's got a great, I'm very blessed that way, but that's how God's unfolded it for me. And I'm taking advantage of it. I'm trying to live into its fullness, but, it is, and I'm still trying to figure out what kind of director I'm going to be, or what, I like to say, like, my ideal job would be at a retreat center. Right now, that's not happening, but who knows if it could. Doing retreats, maybe having a few. There's some directors, all they do is teach and lecture and things like that. I don't feel that calling right now. So, but it is so fulfilling. And yeah, again, I'm coming from such a blessed place right now. And again, in the past, necessarily, I wasn't unsatisfied with what I was doing, but I knew this wasn't, the ultimate in what I needed to do. And sometimes you just got to let things unfold, as we know. Patience is truly a virtue in that way.
Yeah, Sharon, that's great. A spiritual director, and for somebody who's a novice in the world of spirits like myself, you know, how did you learn? What was your favorite method of learning, and who was somebody who was really influential on your path of the spirit? And how do you? This is a lot of questions. I'll try to just take this as you will. How do you learn best in terms of spiritual matters? Who was maybe one of your influential teachers, and how do you try to use that in your way of teaching yourself?
Yeah, there's so many, but I'd have to say the more recent was my Heart Paths training. We had great faculty there. There were several different people, but we had a really good group. We follow, so it's a 3-year program, and you usually stay, everyone stays, in the first year, but spiritual formation. And some people just do the first year, but we had a really consistent group. Just the patience that we gave each other, the holy listening. That's what the main thing is that I've been trained to do deeper holy listening, and be able to provide that space to be open and vulnerable and ask the hard questions of God and yourself. And we just, the space that was allowed there. And even when, I was experiencing the death of both of my parents within a few months of each other, and letting me show my grief, but yet still holding me accountable to reading the books and
Hmm.
doing the work. And I have to say, this is one of the quotes from, and his name is Bob Gardenhire of all names. So that's a
Hmm.
great name for a spiritual director teacher.
Hmm.
I think he really taught me, and this is kind of a Dr. Seuss, so I might have to repeat it. The who that does the what is more important than what the who does.
Mm.
So the who that does the what is more important than what the who does. So in other words, you really have to work on yourself. It's not about getting the knowledge of checking off this workshop or doing, and certainly there's things that you need to be trained as a spiritual director to do, but it's always about working on yourself and
Yeah.
and that. And so again, the deep honesty they show, the faculty, even, it wasn't like, oh, I'm the faculty, I've got all this knowledge, I know everything. It's always
Yeah.
a continuing journey, and that honesty with that I think we see here in Heart Powered Ventures as well.
I agree. And let me ask you, like, this is a follow-up question. You know, how much of, the learning is through like talks? How much of it is through communication, and how much of it, because I know so much of our communication is nonverbal and it's through, emulating people and stuff like that. How do you view that in terms of, how you sort of, teach people? Like, how much of it's verbal?
Right. There's actually, there is some,
Mhm.
and because of COVID, I've done a lot of Zoom meetings, spiritual meetings, that type of thing. But I'd have to say there is something with being present to each other, literally, in the same room. And if you've done, I'm actually in a racial healing group where we're reading My Grandmother's Hands by Resma Arkadam. And he talks about the soul nerve and the feeding off of each other's soul nerve we do. That's a whole nother, but I think that's so important. At the same time, I do feel like, for lack of a better, the Great Spirit, the Holy Spirit is present when you're gathered to be with each other. And I would say sometimes it's not about what's said, but again, the space that you're giving each other. The way I've been learning, and the way it's, again, more giving each other space to, so yeah, there's been some good talks I've learned from, but it's more about, oh, here's a tool, let's go use that tool, or here's an experience, let me take it home and work on it. And it comes down to just sitting in prayer or quietness a lot of times, just being still and letting the Spirit work on you. That's a big part of it. You get that brain out of the way and just sit, and that's where a lot of my teaching has come.
Get the brain out of the way. Yeah.
Yes.
It's interesting too, because we were talking a little bit before we hit record, that when Artem was asking about our background and you were talking about Rose, the teacher that we shared back in, for me in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, for you, the 90s. And one of his adages was, you don't learn the truth or discover the truth, you become the truth.
Yes.
And that's so much in line with your Dr. Seuss, the who with the what and the what with the who.
Mm-hmm.
It's back to you. And I think that is the beauty of what we're all, the three of us, and I think so many others, and certainly in Heart Powered Ventures and the people that I'm mentoring, is it's like we just embody, just by being fully ourselves, we embody, and that there's a transmission, and then there's a transformation. That's a clip. If we were taking clips out of them, that's one I would clip. That's a keeper. I don't know what the hell I said, but when it came out, I said, oh yeah, that's it.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, I hear you, man. Yeah.
No, but it's so beautiful, because
It is.
there's so much more ease around that, because then you're just being, I'm not, and I feel with you, just the way the effortless way things coming, you're not interested in educating, you're just being, you're just pouring forth who you are. And I want to, it's just so interesting, because we were in the group that at the time we shared together, it was a very, what I think what the traditional teachings would call an esoteric path. It was like, not for the masses. It was the Rose said, 1 in a million get enlightened. And, religion was kind of for everybody, but we were the superior creatures who were going to transcend personal gods and all this other stuff. And and I mean, I know you, that wasn't just something you were trying to, that's, where you have a mystical bent. That's what I'm trying to say. A very truly mystical bent. And you wear kind of the traditional, you use the word God without apology, which I love. I'm always apologizing for using the words. I'm going to use God. Now you can take it as a metaphor, but you're unapologetically, Christian, or at least in that. So how does that, just tell me how that all feels, or how that all plays, or how you're able to wear it all so well?
That's a good question because, again, my time there in the college days, and then just when I wouldn't say floating, but just not really claiming, if they were someone to tell me, you're going to end up going to a Christian-based spiritual direction training and kind of be active in your own church. I'm like, what? And not that I was anti-religion, but just the whole, I mean, I could have seen myself and still, crystals and things like that. I don't know. It happened so naturally. I mean, it's kind of the classic God puts it in front of you and you trip over it. So you just can't avoid it, right? Like it's literally my path. And I've just learned to claim that. And I do like to say, I do I'm open to all faiths and even the non-spiritual. And, I'm meeting a lot of people and a few of my clients who are in the faith deconstruction phase. They're done with the traditional church, but there's still room for a non-traditional new Christian based or whatever, even get the word church out of that, your spirituality. So again, I not would have guessed that I would be kind of so traditional in that way. But yeah, I like to say, I mean, the Christian contemplative tradition is so ancient. And in some ways it's very non-traditional and and it's kind of just the true who Jesus was, type of thing, but not in the Southern Baptist traditional way. It's such a dichotomy, but
Wow.
I've just learned to claim it.
And that is, Art, if you have something to say, just let me know, because I'm so excited about this, and I want to make sure I leave space for everyone. But I find this so, just so, it's just I'm so curious about this in my own experience, because it was like, okay, we were, and I still have an attunement towards kind of an impersonal state of just, perfection and that which is, and it doesn't have a face. It just is, and it's who we are. And so there was kind of like a bypassing this kind of connection to personal deities and just having your mind and attuned. And in my own, the deepest transcendent experience I had, that's what I didn't experience, anybody there. And at the same time, I have such help, I feel such a personal divine help that seems, truly invested in this little schmuck named Dave Gold. So, I'm just kind of riffing on this, that I don't know. It's so cool not to know, not to need to know, to just really have an attunement to both that infinite, impersonal, and then also just the joy and the love of whatever these bevies of angels are that really seem to want to put stuff in front of us that we could trip over in order to find God.
Yes. I found that true. Again, just the immensity, non-knowing. I mean, one of the ancient Christian texts that centering prayer comes out of is called the cloud of unknowing. This is unknown Christian mystic monk that wrote this. But at the same time, it is so personal. It's so intimate. And again, that's what one of my big, if I can claim some theology, God is very present, organic, always working with us. And there's things in the moments that we can take from it. Not what the pastor said last week in the sermon, but when you sit and there's something coming up for you, I mean, that's God. That's the universe trying to teach you something. And it's so intimate. It couldn't be, my message is going to be totally different than yours or Artem's in each moment. And that's the beauty of it. That's, again, and then you lose words for that, right? Like how intimate that can be.
Yeah, that's beautiful. For me lately, and it's funny because I totally contradicted myself earlier when I said something about trying, but I feel like when you stop trying, you start being, when you stop trying, and when you stop, sort of going against it and forcing it, things just kind of happen. I picked up, I think you said you had, your own spiritual teacher even now. I find it interesting that both you and Dave, I feel like it's this beautiful system of, you learn from somebody and then you teach others. And if you don't have that, it's like something is out of balance, like even when you're a spiritual, teacher, director, you still have somebody that you're learning from always. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Sure. And again, I'll even resist that word of teacher, because that is not what I do. I'm more of I'm listening and letting people struggle some about, that's their journey. I'm just more of an accompanier, trying to help them see the bigger picture and notice things. Especially it's really been amplified through COVID. So I have my own personal spiritual director. I have a spiritual supervisor that I share with someone. So I meet with them monthly and bring to them, like with a session that I had trouble with. I have a little prayer group that we study Thomas Merton. They have been instrumental, and one of them's a director, one's works at the Catholic Church, and one works at the Child Care Center at the Catholic Church. Very different backgrounds, but I've learned so much. And again, it's not like, oh, Sharon, you need to do this. It's sharing our personal struggles and seeing how God's working in their life. And there's a whole slew. There's a contemplative community I've been in touch with. I've learned a lot from them. We steal some of the Richard Rohr type things. So I can't really, and that's the beauty of this, and I think, it's been mentioned. There's not just been one single teacher that's like, oh my gosh, if I have to say it, I'll get kind of traditional. Jesus is my teacher. God's my great teacher, but I'd say just life itself. It's just this unfolding has been my teacher, but you got to be paying attention. And you mentioned that, sometimes if you quit trying, you just be, and there is that, but then it's so easy to numb ourselves. I have my own numbing ways of Facebook and just kind of trying to unplug, because it's been kind of painful to watch some things, but you just got to be in the present, no matter how uncomfortable it can be.
Yeah.
And part of, me well enough to know when I'm about to pull the soapbox out and get up on top of it. So I got to get on that soapbox, so I'm going to explode. I'll keep it short. That I've put 30, almost 30 years in with teachers in a subservient relationship. And if we count the person that you and I share in common, it's more like 40, 50. Yeah. It's tons of years. And one of the most beautiful piece of advice I got as I started to come into my own was put no man, and this because they were men, but no man or woman's voice above your own. So there's a way that I subjugated my autonomy and hid behind these teachers, and were happy to be someone in the shadows and make myself invisible because I was afraid of being seen. So there's something about and I have the same kind of like, when you, I wouldn't say you bristle, but it's like you kind of like say, well, let's just be careful about talking about teachers. And simultaneously, the wisdom that I get every day from like listening to Panache Desai, that is that's brilliant. It forms me, it brings me up. There's a way. And I'll just throw this out. And that I think, Artem, you can speak to this too, just in the time I meet everybody in radical equality. I just figured there's some equality here, some equality of essence. And then the areas in which there is actually more experience, more wisdom, whatever that is, more beingness will just emerge. But in that radical equality, I'm not subverting, or I'm not and I'm in a mentor role most of my day. So, that could look like it's not, but it's a radical equality. I'm meeting them in love. I'm meeting them with, no, I'm just seeing myself in you. So there's a beautiful way that one is open to the wisdom of life, including the wisdom that comes through people. And at the same time, there's not subjugation. There's not artificial power structures, and I'm not saying I got the ass kicked out of it either. I'm just saying it's working really well right now. So, I'm watching you soak it up. At the same time, I'm just watching you. You're learning from everybody. And then you're stepping in and finding yourself mentoring people, older than you, smarter than you, richer than you. But that's just because you're owning into yourself. And that's what the moment is demanding, or inviting you to do.
I appreciate that, Dave. Yeah. Yeah. And you know, I think that's an interesting point of like, you know, when we learn something really big and you're like, wow, you know, that was profound. I feel like a lot of people put themselves into that like inferior place. They're like, oh, you know, this person is, you know, they taught me something so important that I wouldn't be able to discover. My dog's freaking out over here on my own. And it's like, all right, this person must be greater than me, you know? And I feel like that's why so many people have been, you know, they've had, you know, painful experiences with, you know, whatever it is, spirituality or religion. And, you know, they take those experiences and they're like, oh, I'm swearing up all of that altogether, but then they're also missing something. Right. So I think that's yeah, that's a balance that's sometimes hard for people to understand. And,
And I would just because I balance is one of those words when I hear it that I also kind of, it's not so, I don't know it's much about, because a balance is almost like you got to take less of something else and more of something else. And then kind of, I think it's more like the full expression, the fullest expression of yourself. There's an equilibrium, you know, it's like when you step into your full self, it balances everything out. And yeah, you might have, you know, there's ways I got to shut up. I could talk this whole time, you know, and so I got to balance my, you know, so it's not, but anyway, there's just a way of rather than me trying to figure out how I can modulate as much more as how I can shine in a way that's non-trespassing and that allows other people to shine as well.
yeah,
So anyway, it's great, Artem. I just love watching that look on your face, you know, because you're soaking it in, you know, it's just great. You're just you're such a good companion in this. So Sharon, we're running out of time. And I think we're just going to build this a spiritual conversation because that's all this has been. This has been,
Yeah.
So tell me what being a director means to you, just so people can understand it, understand you, and also how, if people want to work with, you know, to play with you, to commune with you,
Sure.
whatever, what that looks like.
Um, Gosh, what it means to me is just amazing because I've always been interested in people and their stories. And I kind of get a free ticket to sit with these people who are going through some hard times, good times, and hear their kind of, sometimes they're dark secrets, maybe not the darker ones, their happiness, their musings, their rants. It's just a beautiful window to their soul. And I feel so blessed that they give me that trust to listen. And it's also, I mean, we're taught there's always the holy observer when you sit with someone, and that's the great spirit, the Holy Spirit. So you're not alone. You're more of a witness and seeing how they're working on this person. You're just kind of, again, a companion helping with that. And I just can't, I mean, direction has really helped me. So I'm immensely. So I hope I can be a help to others that way, but just to witness people's, journeys is just, it's such a blessing. So I'm very approachable and, I've got very reasonable rates for what I offer. The first session is always free, and it's always more a get to know each other. Some small talk, some deeper talk. And we got to make sure it's a good fit. So actually it's all about discernment. After we meet and kind of see what you're looking for, what I can offer. Because again, I'm not a teacher. I'm not going to lead you through things. I'm going to accompany you. We'll both pray about it, meditate on it, make sure it's a good fit. And then we'll go forward. By Zoom, usually about an hour or so. Again, usually I'm mostly listening. I might offer a few prayer suggestions or just some observations of what I'm seeing, reflecting back what I hear. Sometimes, I've not had this with my clients, but some clients just come to directors and just sit in silence. They just want that safe space. And it may be just a few minutes of talking. Sometimes they just need that type, again, that openness, that space to be themselves, even in silence. After we've met a few times, we'll check in with each other, make sure it's still working for each other. It's all about open communication as far as that goes. That's kind of like the the real
Great.
base on it.
I gotta say, there's something so beautiful about you being in the position where, because the businessman in me, I'm always saying, "Oh, Sharon, you should raise your rate," blah, 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 blah. But not really. But I mean, I would if that's what we were trying to do, because you are so reasonable. But it's great because you're not really, you're smart about what you're doing, but you're not trying to turn it into a, you're not worried about making money and it necessarily. And there's a purity to that which suits you well. So and if people want to find you, how do they find you?
Yes. Well, my business name is called Lighten Up Spiritual Direction. I do have a website, so it's literally lightenupspiritualdirection.com. You can also find me on Facebook as Lighten Up Spiritual Direction. And then I'm on Facebook just personally as Sharon White Bennett, I believe. So, and as always, of course, the Heart Powered Ventures Network.
Thank you. You're so great at that.